Hi, welcome back to Hoot. In the last chapter, Beatrice saved Roy. Roy was getting beat up again by Dana Matheson because he's back on the bus, and Beatrice sat next to him and stopped it from happening. So, good things there. Chapter 9. School was nerve-wracking. Every time Roy entered one of his classrooms, the other kids stopped what they were doing and stared. It was as if they were surprised to see he was alive with all of his limbs intact. After leaving algebra class, Roy heard a stupendous phony fart noise behind him in the hallway. Garrett. He took Roy by the shirt sleeve and led him to a bathroom. You look sick. You should go home early, Garrett advised. I feel fine, Roy said, which wasn't true. He still had a headache from the thumping Dana had given him on the bus ride. Dude, listen to me, Garrett said. I don't know how you think you feel, but you're sick, really sick, okay? You need to call your mom and go home now. What have you heard? He'll be waiting for you after 7th period. Let him wait, Roy said. Garrett tugged Roy into one of the toilet stalls and locked it from the inside. This is so lame, Roy said. Garrett touched his fingers to his lips. I know a guy in Dana's PE class, he whispered excitedly. He said Dana's going to snatch you before you get on the bus home. And do what? Duh. Right here at school? How? Roy said. Bro, I wouldn't hang out to find out. Hey, you never told me you busted him in the chops, too. Yeah, that wasn't me. Sorry. Roy unlocked the toilet stall and gently nudged his friend out. So what are you going to do? Garrett called over the top of the door. I'm going to take a pee. No, I'm talking about you-know-who. I'll think of something. But what? Even if Roy managed to elude Dana Matheson this afternoon, the drama would start all over again Monday. Dana would resume the stalking, and Roy would have to dream up another escape plan, and that's how it would be every single day until school let out in June. Roy had other options, too, none particularly appealing. If he reported Dana to Miss Hennepin, she'd do nothing for more than summons him to the office for a stern lecture, which Dana would laugh off. Who could take seriously a vice principal with one gnarly hair sprouting out of her lip? If Roy told his parents about the Dana situation, they would be alarmed enough maybe to withdraw him from school. Then he would end up getting bused to some private school where he'd be forced to wear the same dorky uniforms every day, according to Garrett, learn Latin. A third alternative was for Roy to try apologizing to Dana again, but this time oozing remorse and sincerity. Not only would that be groveling, but it probably wouldn't achieve the desired effect, and Dana would still hassle him without mercy. His final option was to stand and fight. Roy was a practical boy. He knew the odds were overwhelmingly against him. He had quickness and brains on his side, but Dana was big enough to crush him like a grape. Roy remembered the time he and his father had a talk about fighting. He said it's important to stand up for what was right, Mr. Eberhard had said, but sometimes there's a fine line between courage and stupidity. Roy suspected that fighting Dana Matheson fell into that second category. And while he disliked the prospect of getting beaten to a pulp, what worried him more was the effect it would have on his mother. He was very conscious of being an only child. He knew his mom would be devastated if something bad happened to him. Roy had almost had a little sister, though he wasn't supposed to know that. His mother carried the baby for 5 months, then one night she got terribly sick and an ambulance rushed her to the hospital. When she came home a few days later, the baby wasn't there anymore, and nobody ever explained why. Roy was only 4 years old at the time, and his parents were so upset that he was afraid to ask questions. A few years later, an older cousin told him what a miscarriage was, and then confided that Roy's mother had lost a baby girl. Ever since then, he tried not to give his parents extra reasons to worry about him. Whether on horseback, bike, or snowboard, he refrained from doing some of the wild daredevil stunts that boys his age usually tried, not because he was afraid for his own safety, but because he felt it was his solemn duty as an only child. Yet there was this morning, on the school bus, insulting the same pea-brained thug who had already held a mortal grudge against him. Sometimes Roy didn't understand what came over him. Sometimes he was too proud for his own good. The last class of the day was American history. After the bell, Roy waited for the other students to file out ahead of him, and then cautiously he peeked in the hall. No sign of Dana Matheson. Roy, is something wrong? It was Mr. Ryan, the history teacher, standing behind him. No, everything's fine, Roy said breezily, stepping out of the classroom. Mr. Ryan closed the door behind them. You going home now, too? Roy asked. Oh, I wish. I got to grade papers. Roy didn't know Mr. Ryan very well, but he walked with him all the way to the faculty lounge. Roy made small talk and tried to act casual while constantly checking behind him to see if Dana was lurking. Mr. Ryan played football in college and since then hadn't gotten any smaller, so Roy felt fairly safe. It was almost as good as walking with his dad. You taking the bus home? Mr. Ryan asked. Sure, Roy said, but isn't the pickup on the other side of school? Oh, I'm getting exercise. When they reached the door of the faculty lounge, Mr. Ryan said, Don't forget the quiz on Monday. Right, War of 1812, said Roy. I'm ready. Yeah, but who won the Battle of Lake Erie? Commodore Perry? Which one, Matthew or Oliver? Roy took a guess. Matthew? Mr. Ryan winked. Study a little more, he said, but have a good weekend. Then Roy was alone in the hall. It was amazing how rapidly schools emptied after the final bell, as if someone had pulled the plug under a giant whirlpool. Roy listened closely for footsteps, sneaking footsteps, but heard only the tick-tick-tick of the clock mounted above the door to the science lab. Roy observed that he had exactly 4 minutes to reach that bus. He wasn't worried, though, because he had already mapped a shortcut through the gym. His plan was to be among the very last to board the bus. That way he could grab an empty seat up front and jump off quickly. Dana and his cronies customarily occupied back rows and seldom even bothered the kids in the front. Not that Mr. Casey would ever notice, Roy thought. He jogged to the end of the hallway and turned right, heading to the double doors that marked the back entrance of the gymnasium. He almost made it, too. Let's be crystal clear about this, Mr. Brannett. You didn't report it to the police? No, sir, said Curly emphatically on the telephone. So there will be no paperwork, right? No possible way for this travesty to end up in the press? None that I can think of, Mr. Muckle. For Curly, it had been another long, discouraging day. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, but after that it was all downhill. The construction site remained uncleared, and the earth-moving equipment sitting idle. Curly had stalled as long as possible before phoning Mother Paula's corporate headquarters. Is this your idea of a sick joke? Chuck Muckle had snarled. It ain't no joke. Tell me again, Mr. Brannett, every miserable detail. So, Curly had repeated everything, beginning when he arrived at the site early the next morning. The first sign of trouble had been Kalo waving a tattered red umbrella and chasing his 4 attack dogs along the inside of the fence. He was shrieking hysterically in German. Not wishing to be mauled by the dogs or gored by the umbrella, Curly had remained outside the gate watching in puzzlement. A Coconut Cove police cruiser had pulled up to investigate. Officer Delenko, the same cop who dozed off while guarding the construction site. It was because of him that the spray painting fiasco had made the newspaper and gotten Curly into hot water with Mother Paula's company. I was on my way to the station when I saw this commotion, Officer Delenko had said, raising his voice over the barking of the Rottweilers. What is wrong with these dogs? Nothing, Curly told him. It's a training exercise. The cop had bought it and driven away, much to Curly's relief. Once the Rottweilers were secured on leashes, Kalo had hustled them into the camper truck and locked the tailgate. Furiously, he turned towards Curly and jabbed the umbrella. You try and kill my dogs. The foreman raised his palms. What are you talking about? Kalo had opened the gate and stomped up to Curly, who wondered if he should pick up a rock for self-defense. Kalo was drenched in sweat with veins on his neck bulging. Snakes! He had spit out the word. What snakes? Ja, you know what snakes. The place is crawling with them. Poisonous ones. Here Kalo had wiggled his pinky fingers. Poisonous snakes with shiny tails. No offense, but you're nutty as a fruitcake, Curly. Never once had seen a snake on Mother Paula's site, and he would have remembered if he had, because snakes really gave him the willies. Nuts, you say? Kalo seized him under one arm and led him to a trailer which served as Curly's office. And there, coiled comfortably on the second step, was a thick, mottled specimen snake that Curly recognized as a cottonmouth water moccasin, common in southern Florida. Kalo was right. It was seriously poisonous, and its tail was sparkly. Curly had found himself backing up. I think you're getting carried away, he said to Kalo. Oh, yeah, you think? The dog trainer had him hauled towards the fence to point out another moccasin, and then another, and then another. There were 9 in all. Curly had been flabbergasted. What you think now? You think Kalo is Nutty Fruit Bar? I can't explain it, Curly said. Maybe the rain brought him out of the swamp? Yeah, sure. Listen. No, you listen. Each dog is worth $3,000 US. There is $12,000 barking here in the truck. What happens? Dog gets bit by snake, dog dies, yeah? I don't know about no snakes, I swear. It's a miracle the dogs they are all okay. Pookie face, the snake came this close. Kalo had indicated a distance. I take an umbrella, I push him away. It was then that Kalo had accidentally stepped in an owl burrow and twisted his ankle. Rejecting his offer of assistance, the dog trainer had hopped on one leg to get back to the truck. And we will stop there.